Hello, everyone on the call today. Let me know if you can hear me all right. Let me know in the chat. I'm so glad that you all could make it today. Um, we're going to be talking about protecting your rental income in a pandemic during these times. Okay, and I think this topic is obviously on everyone's mind. And today I'm going to be your webinar speaker. For those of you who don't know me yet, my name is Alexandra Alvarado. I'm the Director of Education at the American Apartment Owners Association. And I started the education program here about 4 years ago already. We started with a couple dozen of you, and now we have thousands of you joining us a few times a month. And we have several speakers that come on and do these. Today, I'm going to be handling this. It is about screening and leasing strategies, which is our specialty and our area of expertise. But before we begin, I just want to mention a couple things. One is this whole presentation is probably going to be about 50 minutes or so. And then we're going to have a Q&A for about 10 to 15 minutes afterward. So definitely save your questions until the end. I'll be addressing them. I'm not going to look at them during the presentation. Also, just a couple of other things here. The information that I'm going to provide you today is not going to be legal advice. And the information is really just for your consideration as a best practice for you as a housing provider, really just for educational purposes. And then also, if you have any questions about a specific resident or situation, definitely talk to an attorney. If you need a reference, I know a lot of them, and so I can definitely refer you over for that. And then also follow your policies. But if I say something that differs, implement that change upon approval. These are really just some things that you should consider that may be different during this time. All right, so we're going to start first with some market predictions. So the way this is going to be structured is we're going to talk about what is happening currently, what do we see happening to kind of set the scene for this presentation. And then we're going to talk about how are we going to address the screening strategies and how they're going to change because of these predictions. And then also lastly, how does your leasing strategy change? How does filling vacancies change during this time? How do you get a tenant that is going to be a quality tenant? How do you make exceptions without increasing your risk? So that's really going to be the structure of the whole thing. So let's just set the scene here for where we're at right now. Just so you know, at the bottom of every slide, I've included my sources. I will be providing you this entire presentation tomorrow. So if you want to do extra research, highly encourage it. I love sharing my sources. I do a lot of research myself on a regular basis. So definitely take a look at those links at the bottom. I'll be providing you with the full list of all the sources and obviously the recording. So we're in a recession right now, right? That's pretty obvious. Now the question is, what kind of recession are we in? One is, are we in a V shape? So steep decline followed by a quick recovery. We're really hoping for that, right? Here's an example of one I found on Wikipedia that occurred in the 1950s. Or there are some speculations here that it might be a W shape. So that means it's going to be a steep decline, an improvement, and then a decline again. And then why is this really something that may happen? Well, it depends if the virus is going to resurge in the fall or the winter. And then also you have to consider that a lot of creditors are putting off and deferring payments for debtors. And those payments will become due eventually. And that may happen towards the end of the year. And if people can't pay it then, if they have not financially recovered or found employment at that point, then it could also affect the economy. There's also several other things, but I think those two are the most important for today's presentation. So I found this chart, which is kind of alarming, but I think it's also really interesting. It really just shows the progression there. March 14th, 21, 28, April 4th, and April 11th, and then 18th. So this isn't even as recent as, you know, these last 2 weeks, how unemployment has just been increasing. You can see there in which areas it really is most affecting Americans. So what does that lead to? Non-payment of rent, right? So we asked landlords, I put out a survey last month, about 1,100 of you actually replied, and you know what? Thank you so much for replying because it was absolutely helpful. We found that 54% of you said that you did have a tenant that approached you saying that they were not able to pay full rent on April 1st. Very curious to see what this is going to look like for May. So we're actually issuing out another survey, and I would love it if you could take it at the end of this webinar. This kind of data really helps to put out in the media, because we share this with media channels, really prominent ones that pick this up, and it really gets the word out there of what the struggle is for landlords during this time, okay? So since in the last month, what's happened? Well, we know unemployment has probably gone up. We saw that in the chart. And then also, though, some good things have happened, right? So we've had people who have been paid their stimulus check, and then unemployment benefits have started to come in from Congress. Those benefits are set to end at the end of July, but hopefully it gets people through this time, and that's about $600 a week for those that were able to receive it and apply. So that's kind of where we are with non-payment of rent. Also, who is affected? Class C properties. So these are properties that have high rent to income ratios already. I read a very alarming statistic that 40% of American adults have less than $400 in emergency cash, and that's from a Federal Reserve report from a few years ago. I linked it there. And so you can see how that could cause a domino effect, right? If you have so little in savings, something like this happens. Maybe they've always paid on time, but they kind of live paycheck to paycheck. So obviously that's going to cause some issues for those types of properties. And then rentals in cities with more hospitality and retail jobs, as you saw in the chart, where they're experiencing higher levels of unemployment. Now that may change, because I know some of those cities are going to be reopening, so we have yet to see how those economies will recover, and then also whether there will be any sort of negative consequences in terms of illness from reopening those cities. So we'll have to wait and see how that goes. Another thing is fewer lease signings. So some of you may have already been experiencing this, okay? Fewer people are moving. Saw a RealPage study that at the beginning of April, lease signings were down about 45%. And then most recently this last week, 36. So it got a little bit better, which is good. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to fill a vacancy right now, it's definitely going to be more challenging than it might have been in the past for some of you, especially if you have a Class A property. Class A would be your luxury rentals. So these are higher priced rentals that are located in urban areas. So your vacancy rates may actually be a little bit higher than you'd like if you have those kinds of rentals. Hopefully you have a diversified rental portfolio so you don't get hit with that. And then also lease extensions. So we know, I'm sure a lot of you too on the call have seen people asking to maybe extend their lease. So depending on how you normally stack lease expirations and terminations, that may result in having a lot of vacancies all of a sudden in maybe a time where you normally would not have had vacancies. So that could change some things for you as well, something to be aware of. And then also, I read a study from Harvard that was showing how this is different than the last recession. So last recession, homeowners became renters. It was great for the rental market. In this recession, you have higher vacancies in Class A properties. You have higher defaults in Class C, and then you have like Class B properties where kind of in between might not be affected as much. So that's really what we're looking at here. And this brings us now to screening strategies. So screening strategies are anything from the interview to collecting documentation, calling referrals, and then doing a credit and background check. And so I know you guys all know how to do those things, but what I want to discuss today is what is different, what changes. So you want to be careful, right? During this time, tenant fraud during recession is usually on the rise. That happened in 08 and 09. We saw it for ourselves. In the company where, we had a lot of that, and then it went down again. So now we expect it to kind of come up again. And so what that means is you have to be more diligent than ever. The other thing as well is you may have people who maybe have legitimate reasons why they might not have amazing credit, or they might have had a slight loss of income. And so you want to be able to make exceptions, but you want to be able to do it intelligently. So you're not putting yourself at risk. So we're going to review that in this section, starting with the interview. So as you know, social distancing, we can't meet people in person anymore. So if you have not set up Zoom or FaceTime or Skype or whatever it is, you need to do that now, because it is extremely important that you at least see the face of the person who is going to be signing the lease. It is very easy, if you don't, for that person to give you documentation of somebody else and you wouldn't know. You wouldn't be able to match that to the face that you saw. So that's important, and you don't want to be taken advantage of. So make sure that that is in place, and it may even scare off some people who were hoping to never have to see your face. So now, what are the questions that we ask? Okay, I did a whole webinar on the interview process. We're not going to go that much into detail today, but I want to point out what questions are going to be most important moving forward and why, and how to handle them. So one is, why are you moving? Okay, so we want to be able to get a story, right? So that we have a story to match the data to. And I think now this is more important than it ever has been, because we want to know, why are you moving? Did you get laid off and just find a job in, the city where the rental is? Or maybe you had to move to take care of a family member or something. So those are going to be some important details to know, and to give you a sense of where the person is coming from. And also total monthly income. So some of you may have been very strict for a long time. You want to see, 3 times the rent for income. And that might not be something that everybody has anymore. And so you may need to be flexible with that. But really the idea here is that you mention to them that monthly income is not the stimulus check, right? Obviously, I know that seems obvious, but some people might not think so. And then unemployment benefits as well. Just be aware that that is technically income, but it is limited. And so you want to make sure that you let them know what counts as income, or what you are counting as income. We're going to talk about that more in detail shortly, but just a great question to always have. And then how many people will be living in the unit? So again, for economic reasons, people are really having a hard time paying rent. And so we're going to probably start to see a lot of families moving in together, roommates. Okay, so that's okay. For you, as long as it fits within a health and safety standard that you have, then it should be fine. But you need to know. You need to know who's living there. You need to be able to screen those people. You need to be able to have them on the lease as well. So just let them know that your policy on tenants is flexible, but you need to know who they are. Okay, and that'll help you out a lot in the future. It's better to know than to say that you have a very strict limit and then have them go behind your back, and then you don't even know who's living in your unit anymore. Next one is, can you afford the application fee and security deposit? So similar thing here. If you have somebody who maybe can't afford 2-month security deposit anymore, or maybe more, maybe you need to rethink that. Or maybe you can look at having a security deposit alternative, which is something that we're going to be discussing later on in the presentation, to be able to give those people some options. And can you provide references from previous and current employers and landlords? This is especially important now. We want to be able to verify income, any income that they have. And then also for landlords, as you know, evictions are pretty much stopped, okay? So there's really not a lot of ways that you can find out what is happening with that tenant's previous landlord, unless you call the previous landlord. And we're going to talk about how to call those referrals as well in just a bit. And then lastly, do you have any questions? Just open up the floor for them. See if they have any concerns about coronavirus in your rental that you can address. That's always a good thing to do. And then I have one last thing. So whatever you do, don't ask them if they've felt ill, they've had COVID, if they've been out of the country, they've been around people with COVID. I know that it's very tempting to want that information, but it does touch on now 2 things: privacy, medical privacy, and also potentially discrimination based on their national origin, if that may be, the country where they may have come from or been visiting. So you definitely want to stay away from those questions. What is best is to provide them with information about health and safety and how you're handling it and how you would like them to handle it. And we have a form for that I'll be providing for you as well. So keep that out of the questionnaire, okay? And then documentation. So one of the problems with recessions is people who don't have enough income are more likely to fake the income. And there's many ways they can do that. So the advice here is really to have maybe multiple types of income documentation required and then to verify them. And I know that might have seemed like a lot of overkill in the past, okay? But now it may actually be something that you should do to keep from getting taken advantage of, essentially. So let's talk then about what is a source of income first. So just so that we're clear here, there are some states, such as California, that do not allow you to discriminate based on source of income. So this is actually a California legal code, and they define source of income as lawful, verifiable income that's paid to the tenant, but it could include local public assistance, housing subsidies, vouchers. So just be aware that there may be more people that are going to be receiving that type of income. And so if you're in one of those states where you're required to consider that income, make sure that that is part of the process. If you're in a state where it's not required, it's up to you, but it may be something you do want to consider because a lot more people may have those types of sources of income. Pay stubs. I would say probably #1 most fake document for sure. And it's actually hard to tell. Sometimes they're getting better, but at least some of the things that you should be looking for on a legitimate pay stub is going to be name, occupation, and date of birth that matches. And then not having spelling mistakes, digits and decimals that line up. Looks like it's made with an actual accounting software, not Word. And I think some of you might know what I'm talking about. And then zeros and O's should look different. Estimations and roundups are minimal. So try to look for maybe not everything being rounded to the nearest zero. And it's clearly legible and easy to understand. And this goes for big and small companies alike. I mean, they should all have their accounting in order to be able to fulfill these requirements. Another thing that you may not have collected before, but may be worth doing now, are bank statements from the last 30 to 90 days. So you can choose how far back you want to go. But the reason why this is important is because you want to be able to check the income that's coming from the employer. You might want to look to see if they have direct deposits coming from them that matches the pay stub details. And then also, what they've been paying for rent, see if that's on there. Most people don't pay these things in cash. They don't get paid in cash and they don't pay rent in cash anymore. So it should be actually pretty easy to see within an account. And then also check for a healthy savings and checking balance. So we mentioned that $400 statistic before. We definitely want to see more than that. But let's say you have somebody who maybe had to get their hours cut, okay, and they're not making as much money, but they have a great savings account. And that might be something that might counteract that. So having that information is also going to help out. And then, of course, government issued ID, always going to be important to have that face to match the one that you interviewed. And then any information on the W-2, again, everything should match completely. I'm not saying you have to get all these documents, but I think it's worth considering which ones you think will be most helpful and maybe having more than one, because that'll be harder for people to fake. And in terms of the ID, by the way, it doesn't have to be a driver's license. In a lot of states, like California, for example, you can't require that they give you their social. So you just want to be careful about that. Really, government issued ID could be, just a regular state license, or it could be a passport. So just be careful with that, but make sure, again, everything matches. So now for referrals. Okay, so we talked about this briefly. In our experience, so we actually do calls on behalf of landlords. It's one of the services that we offer. When you order tenant screening, you can add on an employment verification or landlord verification. And honestly, this has been challenging for us. And I think that now you'll find as well, it's going to be challenging for you to get a hold of someone at a company and not have to call a cell phone. So one of the things that tenants might take advantage of is giving you a cell phone number because nobody's working from the office and it's probably easier to reach that person by cell, and maybe they don't have any bad intentions, but it does make it easier for someone to give you the cell phone of a friend or family member. So what can we do to counteract that? So one is verify LinkedIn. So verify the reference and verify your applicant, and then look up the company on the Secretary of State to see if they are actually registered there. Most companies have a website, so look to see their website. Try to look for their main phone number and their corporate email, because those are actually going to be probably still answered and looked at, and that can actually help you get through to somebody who does work at the company that can verify the person's current employment status and their salary. So that's a great way to do it. For landlords, we also mentioned how important it is to be able to reach a landlord and talk to them. So something you could do, I've heard some of our members doing this, is searching public homeowner records if it's a small mom and pop kind of landlord who maybe owns the home themselves and rents it out. That could be something that could be helpful. The other thing is the landlord test. So calling up that reference and telling them, hey, I'm interested in learning more about your rental. And if they respond like they have absolutely no idea what you're talking about, they're probably not a landlord. So that's a good way to open it up, kind of just to find out if they are in fact a rental. If they are a landlord, they're probably going to say, which one, or I don't have any that are open or vacant right now. So these are all strategies you should always be doing, but more important now than ever. And for criminal, this is definitely the same. So criminal, you want to double check spelling, date of birth, and social. It's really going to help with the accuracy of the report. If you have a middle name, include it. If you can get a social, put it in. And also make sure to follow HUD guidelines. So if you do get a criminal hit, you want to make sure that you're looking at the type of crime, the date of the crime, and the efforts to rehabilitate. You do not want to have a blanket policy that says absolutely no felons. If you have that anywhere on your ads, anywhere in your application, remove it, because that is against HUD's guidelines. You could get in trouble for that. And then lastly, if you're unsure or the record is incomplete, which can happen in certain counties, give us a call. If you're using our services for criminal, we can definitely verify the information. We can get more details for you. And really, our information is there at the bottom on the footer of every single slide here. And we do answer the phone constantly. So please give us a call if you do find a criminal record. And then eviction. So we mentioned this, and this keeps coming up again. Evictions aren't being recorded right now. So what we need to look at is really, okay, why do we still need an eviction report? Well, if you want to look in the past to see if the person's had an eviction, that's a great predictor of the future. So maybe, something unrelated to coronavirus caused them to fall behind on rent payments in the past. And so you want to make sure you have that information available to you. So it really says a lot about, them, and then also where they're at now and their ability to pay. So want to point out one thing here. I'm not sure if, I think a lot of people aren't aware of this, but Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax, so the big three credit bureaus, they started the National Consumer Assistance Plan back, I think it was 2015, but in 2017, they actually came together and they all agreed to remove evictions and tax liens from the credit report. So for those of you who ordered just a credit report alone, and this is not just with our company, with any company, you are not getting eviction judgments and records. So in order to get that, you have to order a separate report now that is actually for only evictions, and that report we offer. And basically how it works for us is we take the person's social or their taxpayer ID number and their name. We find a list of all the addresses where they've ever lived, and then we look for evictions at those addresses. Eviction records are real tricky. They don't have a social on them, and most of them don't have a date of birth. So it is very difficult to match if you don't have the correct addresses. So that's why I want to point this out. If you see this message on any of our reports, it is extremely important that you give us a call. And the reason why is because if you read it, it means that the name may be incorrect, or that the social is incorrect, or maybe the person just doesn't have address history, which is fine, right? That can definitely happen. But we want to make sure that the name and the social is correct, because that affects the eviction report. It affects the criminal report. It may not affect credit though, because credit reports are a little different in that they don't have to have exactly the perfect information to pull up a report. So the credit bureau is just looking for at least an 80% match. Criminal and eviction has to be very exact. So make sure that if you see this message, you give us a call. We can correct it for you for free. Okay, so credit report. Look at more than just the credit score. I've always said this. I stand by it still, and maybe even more now. What's most important, and I think, we could talk about credit reports all day. I could go line by line with you on them and analyze them. I love doing that, by the way. If you ever want somebody to look at your credit report, you can ask me. But I want to point out here the total account balance and the monthly payment. So what does that mean? It's debt. And in this case, debt is important because you want to look at how much money is coming out of this person's pocket on a monthly basis. And can they afford to pay the rent and pay that monthly debt payment? So you might find that somebody doesn't have the rent to income ratio that you want. But when you look at somebody like this who has only $144 a month that they're paying out of pocket, that's not bad. But then if you had somebody who maybe just got a brand new car and they're making a $600 payment a month on that car, maybe they have a student loan too, maybe they have something else. I mean, now you're looking at, okay, even though they might make 3 times the amount of rent, most of that's going towards their car or towards their student loan. So that's going to be really important, I think, in coming months. If you want to be flexible with this rent to income ratio, look at the debt. Be smart about it, right? So someone with lower debt is definitely always going to be a good candidate. And then on this other right side, we have all of the negative information. Ideally, we'd want to see all zeros, but this is just a summary, so you should look at the details of these past due accounts and these collections and see really where they're coming from and when they occurred. And that brings me to collections. So one of the things you want to look out for in collections, especially now, is the creditor. So the creditor is the person who they owed money to originally, right? And so even though apartment complexes cannot take a tenant to court, they may be able to, in some states, report them to a collection agency. And so even without a judgment, there may be a collection on the account. So you want to look for a creditor that has the word apartment or homes or something like that in it that could trigger for you maybe potentially that this person didn't pay some sort of rental bill or left damages. So the next thing you want to look at too is the amount. Obviously, higher is worse. And then when it happened, was it related to coronavirus? Does it make sense with the timeline that they gave you? And then lastly, have they paid it out or closed it? If it's recent, they probably haven't, but if they have paid it out, you can just discount it altogether. That means that they don't have that liability anymore, and you really shouldn't consider it. So one thing I want to point out about how the CARES Act is affecting the credit reports is that what the CARES Act did was it said that for any agreement between January 31st and July 25th of this year, or 120 days after the national emergency ends, creditors are required to report any account that has a payment accommodation applied to it as current to the credit bureaus. So what that means is if I got a car loan in February and then I couldn't pay it anymore and I called Honda, they said, Honda, I can't pay this anymore, and they decided to maybe do some sort of payment reduction, deferment, forbearance for some time, and I had always paid it on time since then, or maybe it was brand new, then you would have no way of knowing that on the credit report. So that's no longer being reported. If it's any sort of agreement that was made in this time space, you wouldn't know. And that's only if the person was current when they made that sort of accommodation. So if I had been paying late already, I wouldn't have been able to do that, right? But the idea here is that if they were paying on time, they might have some sort of accommodation. And so you wouldn't know about that accommodation. You may want to ask tenants about it. Maybe they'll be honest with you and let you know, because we mentioned before one of the issues with that W economic recession is that some of these creditors that have put these debts on deferment may actually start to take them out of deferment or forbearance. And so you want to make sure that you maybe get that information, although it's difficult because the only way you would know is if the tenant told you. So something to be aware of. All right, leasing strategies. So leasing strategies, this includes marketing your listing, filling the vacancy, and then putting together the lease. How do we do these things differently now that we have a pandemic in place? So clearly, marketing is not the same. So you can't have an open house anymore. You can't have somebody come and do a showing or a private showing with them. So it's very, very important that you have that available. And also, not only that, there are fewer qualified renters now, potentially, for your rental if you have a vacancy. And so you're competing with other landlords, with other property management companies for the few good tenants that there will be, because a lot of them have been affected, and so they are a little bit higher risk. So if you want those cream of the crop kind of tenants that are left, how do you get them? So first of all, look at your videos and pictures. If you have a website, whatever you can update digitally is going to help you, because that's all people have to go off of now. And also having virtual showings is going to be necessary. People who are in that upper echelon of, great credit, they didn't lose their job, you definitely want that tenant. So how do you make sure you seal the deal? You have to have these types of resources available to you. And as far as updating your pictures, you don't necessarily even need to take new pictures. There are services that actually Photoshop edit them for you. They change the lighting. They kind of can take out some, unsightly, pieces of furniture, something that you might have not wanted in the picture, shadows. So you can definitely do a lot with what you have, and just be prepared, because those types of listings, those really nice ones, are the ones that are going to get the better tenants probably applying. You want to make sure you're in that category. Also, very important to set your rental rates at market value. So we know that supply and demand here is fluctuating greatly depending on the type of property, the area the property's in. We know that because of all of these vacancy rate changes that are happening, that may affect how much you can charge for rent. So you don't want to be out of the loop and be charging something for rent that just doesn't make sense anymore. You may have to lower your rental rates in some areas. So if you really want to know and get the most accurate data, the best thing that you can do is to use a company that does that. And so Rentometer is one that I've used it. I think like everybody on our team has used it at some point. It's extremely accurate, and their data is all in real time. So it picks up on these trends pretty instantly. It uses comparables to really tell you and drill down exactly what price you should put the rental at. And just a quick plug, but I really think this is something beneficial for you guys, so this is why I mention it. If you want to get a discount on their paid membership, they have unlimited number of queries that you can make. Basically just gives you something like this, and then you can get a more comprehensive report, especially if you're looking to invest. So that's another webinar I want to do soon, is how do we invest and take advantage of it in this time. Rentometer is a great way to be able to see kind of where rental rates are being affected. And these are the codes here and that link that you can use to get those discounts. You do have to use the link and the code. So I'm going to send it to you in the email tomorrow so that you all can take a look at it. So you don't need to write it down or anything, but just something to be aware of, that whatever you're setting your rental rates at is going to be more important coming now than before, because they're changing on a regular basis. All right, so next thing here is following up on leads quickly. So if you have leasing agents or you have a team, you want to make sure that it is extremely obvious to them that they need to follow up on leads as quickly as possible. As I mentioned, there are fewer qualified leads out there, so you have to be quick because they have a lot more options now and you have fewer. So that puts them in control, and so you want to make sure that you can accommodate them as quickly as possible. So that might mean you might have to finally go digital in 2020. You might have already done it already. If you have, you're in a great position. If you have not, now is the time. If there ever was a time to go digital, it's now. And whether it's doing your showings, as I was talking to you virtually, also having online rental applications. So this is actually something that's in beta test for us, but if you email me directly, I can create an online application link, and you can put it on your listings, or you can put it on your website if you have one, And when somebody clicks on it, they can apply, pay your application fee, so they can pay for it. And when they're done paying for it, you get the full report emailed to you. So if you want that, please let me know. You can reply to the email. You can email us, our customer service, whatever it is to contact us. I can definitely set that up for you if you're interested. And also screening. You should already be doing your screening online, especially if you're using us already. It's even more convenient now than ever. And then lease signing. So we do have landlord forms that are digital, but regardless of which kind of leases you're using currently, you definitely want to make sure you're getting lease signatures, e-signatures that can really help to close a deal faster. So you want to make sure that they don't have to print. And some people don't have printers, they don't plan on getting one, and they don't want to leave their house to go get something printed out when they could just sign it electronically. So electronic signatures with Adobe does it, DocuSign, there's a bunch of them now. So definitely look into that. And then online rent payments. So before, you might have been collecting, I know some landlords that even like personally collect rent. That's not an option anymore. So what you want to do to eliminate that person-to-person interaction, and just in general, just to make it more convenient, you can use PayRent. We work with them, and we've referred a lot of people over to them, and it's actually really a great way to streamline your rental payments, and offering that might set you apart from some of your competitors. So going as digital as you can is definitely going to be helpful now more than ever. All right, so another leasing strategy for filling a vacancy. So now let's say you do get somebody who applies and they aren't your ideal tenant. So they don't check all the boxes, but maybe they have a good reason for that and you want to give them a chance. So you want to do that intelligently, and that can be done using Lease Guarantee. So for those of you who don't know yet, Lease Guarantee is something that we offer that basically reimburses you for court judgments ranging from $1,000 to $10,000. So what that means is if they end up renting with you and then later you end up having to evict them because they can't afford rent, then you actually can get paid out that court judgment. Even if they can't afford it, they're probably never going to pay you. Actually, if you have the lease guarantee, you can get paid out up to your policy amount. And so that's something that's definitely going to be something that's more useful. And the reason why I bring it up is because you may have seen it before and thought that it wasn't really necessary. Maybe you had more qualified candidates that were applying at some point, but now that may change. And so if you are going to make exceptions, this would be one way that you can really mitigate your risk. And just so you know, the whole point of reimbursing judgments is really, if you look at collection agencies, they don't have a great success rate. And then most judgments are never collected. That number's going to go up. For sure, it's going to go up, especially as courts start to see an influx of evictions. There will be a lot of people who will be evicted but won't have the money to pay. So what does it do? It protects your rental income, helps you fill the vacancy faster because now you can comfortably rent to more people who maybe don't meet all those qualifications. You help them qualify, and ultimately you get some peace of mind. So this is something that you should definitely look into as part of your leasing strategy. Just so you know a couple more details about it, and I'll be brief because I'm not going to spend all day talking about this. But these are the rates for Lease Guarantee. They're pretty reasonable. They can go up if the person has bad credit. Most people do qualify, but the idea here is that you're getting thousands of dollars of protection, but the tenant or you are only paying a few hundred. So if you decide to have the tenant pay for it, which a lot of tenants may be open to doing that, you can add it to a security deposit. You can do it instead of a cosigner. You can reduce their security deposit if they have, pretty decent credit, or they've had good credit in the past and maybe were recently affected by coronavirus. So you want to make sure that you're offering this as an option instead of just, dismissing it altogether. And then also, you could pay for it too and work out some sort of payment plan with the tenant. It's totally up to you. Or I've even seen some landlords who just pay for it because they see it as an investment and to mitigate their risk. All right, so the next section here are clauses and addendums. So this section is going to be the last section of the webinar. So let's get started. So your lease is probably okay. If you need an updated lease, we have some great state-specific leases. But here's a couple clauses that you may need to amend, or that you may want to consider adding to your lease. So something about late charges. So if you can say something that you're not going to impose late rent charges during this time. There are some states that actually are not allowing landlords to impose late charges until the emergency orders are lifted. So I would say something to consider to include. And again, you want to review all of these with your attorney if you're going to make any changes with your lease. And then also as well, the guest clause. So we talked about how there may be more tenants living together on a permanent basis, but they also may have guests. So I have a quick little anecdote. My boyfriend's mom had her friend visiting from New York City. They're both in their 70s. The friend came to visit, coronavirus hit, and she did not want to go home. She has been there now for almost 2 months and definitely never planned it, but we believe it's for her best interest and health and safety. And, you know, my boyfriend's mom is more than willing to accommodate her, and fortunately, her landlord is as well. They understand the situation. So adding a guest clause or having some sort of amendment that just tells them that there's a limit on guest stays. So take a look at your guest clause currently and what you have in there. You may want to add something about the pandemic and saying that you may be able to make an exception for them. Maybe include as well something about how you may want to screen them. And just make sure that it's very clear that they're not tenants. They don't have the same rights as tenants. They are guests, even if they're staying longer than 2 days or 3 days, which is usually, I think, where landlords usually set their limit. So you want to make sure that it's clear in your lease that just because they're staying longer does not mean they're a tenant. And this kind of clause could help to clear that up. Also, another one, attorney's fees and cost clauses. So this was actually something that was brought up to me by Nate Bernstein, who's a terrific attorney. He's done a couple webinars for us before, and he wrote an article about this. I have it linked there, and I actually hadn't thought about this. So when you have, you know, an attorney's fees and cost clause in your lease agreement, it's basically to let the tenant know and for you to know who is responsible to pay these fees. So traditionally, you'll see a paragraph sort of like this one. Here's an example of one. And basically what this is saying is that the prevailing party, so whoever wins, will recover the attorney's fees and litigation costs from the losing party. So that means if you win, you get to get your fees paid by the tenant, as well as whatever they owe you, which sounds great, right? But keep in mind, tenants are going to be suing landlords more than before, and that's something that was brought up in our coronavirus webinar Q&A with two eviction and an asset protection attorney, and they basically said that they foresee a lot of lawsuits coming your way. And so if you want to consider this, again, something to discuss with your attorney, you may want to say that if there's any type of litigation between the parties, each party bears their own attorney's fees and costs. Because if for some reason you were successfully sued for something, maybe you didn't clean something properly, I don't know, you could think of 1,000 reasons somebody could sue at this point. You want to make sure that you don't also have to end up paying for those fees. The other thing as well to note is if you are getting lease guarantee, I would include the first one. So this clause, the longer one. And the reason why for that, or you may want to consider including it, is because if you have lease guarantee can actually pay you the attorney's fees and litigation costs if they're awarded to you. So in that case, if they were awarded, it would be a good thing, right? You could use your lease guarantee to get reimbursement for that in addition to the judgment. Okay, so last here, we have some free addendums and forms for you all. I will be sharing them with you on the email with the recording tomorrow. And one of those is the lease guarantee addendum, which if you are going to do lease guarantee, it is required to have the tenant sign it. And it basically just tells them that they're still responsible for rent, that lease guarantee is issued to you, and it just basically lays out what their responsibilities are. So that's free, obviously, and necessary if you're doing lease guarantee. And then a letter concerning coronavirus. So we talked about at the way beginning of the presentation, if you have a new tenant, you really don't want to ask them if they've had any sort of COVID-19 issues with health or been around people like that. So the best thing you can do is to give them this letter that we've created that really spells out exactly what their responsibilities are, some information about the virus, so that you're doing your part and you're also reducing your liability as well by having some sort of notification that you can provide to current tenants and new ones about the coronavirus. Another thing to bring up as well, in the coronavirus webinar with the two attorneys that I mentioned, the Q&A, one of the things that I think really stood out was one of the attorneys mentioned that having your cleaning policy completely recorded is actually going to help if later on there's some sort of litigation that comes out against you. You want to make sure that you have a very consistent procedure. So that means for how to clean common areas, how to clean a vacancy that you're going to fill. So being able to assure a tenant that the space that they're going to be moving into is completely clean is going to be more important than it was before, and you should have some proof to back that up. So if you use a professional cleaning company or if you have your own processes, that's okay too. Just make sure that it's all written down and disclosed. That may help avoid a lawsuit or help you in the future. And you can actually have the tenant sign off that they're aware of that. And that's something that you can add to that letter. So the letter is a Word doc, so you can kind of make it your own, but I think it's a good template to start with. All right, the next one here is the rent deferral agreement. So obviously you don't need this right away if you're filling a vacancy with a new tenant, but May 1st is around the corner. And so you may have some tenants that approach you that do need some help with rent, whether they're not going to pay all of it or maybe just they're only going to be able to pay some of it. That's okay. In some states, you are required to accept that, but either way, if you are going to do that, you need to have something in writing. It is of the utmost importance that you have an enforceable agreement that has been signed by both you and the tenants, and that later, if they can't pay it, you're able to actually enforce it. It is very difficult to enforce an oral agreement. And so we've created this rent deferral agreement for you all. It is free, and I'll be providing it to you tomorrow. So that you can download that in case that you need it. Hopefully you won't need it yet. And what it does as well is it spells out the payment terms, so you can actually set your own payment terms. You can say, over however many months, and they have to pay it all back at once, or what would be the date, or so you can really play around with it and make it your own. So again, definitely if you're going to do that, do it intelligently. And I really think that's the kind of like the motto of this whole webinar. We want to make sure that if we are making changes, we're doing so in an intelligent way. If we're making exceptions, that we're not just making exceptions willy-nilly just for everybody. So I hope that this presentation has really helped you to kind of take a look and reassess some of the strategies that you've been using already. So with that being said, I'd like to open it up for questions and answers. If any of you have any questions that are really legally specific, I'm not an attorney, and even attorneys don't provide advice on these too much, so I could definitely refer you to somebody, but definitely ask, and I'll see which ones I can answer for you today. We have like another 10 minutes or so on the call, so let me take a look here and see what we got. So if a tenant does not notify you in writing that they cannot pay, should I assume that they should pay? And I would say yes. So, I mean, they should be notifying you. And I think that's part of the coronavirus letter as well, is it notifies tenants that if they cannot pay, they should let you know and work something out with you. So yeah, you can assume that they are going to pay until, they come back and ask maybe for some sort of exception. Okay, next question. If the tenant does not notify you that they have more people than what they indicated in the application, so if something happened to one of those persons not on the application, am I responsible? So for this one, it is a little bit teetering there on the legal edge of what I can really give. But what I can say is that it is important that you disclose to tenants that that's part of your policy and that it's okay to have additional occupants. That usually helps, because I think one of the reasons why tenants won't actually tell you that they have people that are staying is because they're afraid you're going to say no. And honestly, they're probably going to do it anyway. And so it's best that you tell them that it's okay, but that you need to know. And then also, obviously, if it's like way too many people, that's an issue. But I think especially during this time, you're going to find that's going to be more common. Are the forms available in English and Spanish? So yes, actually not yet. Coming soon. We are working on it. So keep an eye out for that. I think that's an excellent question. We've actually been talking about making all of our forms in Spanish. So that's a big task. So at least for now, the coronavirus ones I know are really important. So you should be seeing that soon, probably in our newsletter. If you're not subscribed to it yet, please just let me know in the chat and I can subscribe you, because that's where we announce those kinds of things. So here somebody asked, is it recommended to show a unit using a live feed like Zoom and possibly conduct interview at the same time? Sure. You could definitely do that, and that you might be able to kill two birds with one stone. So you can, show them the unit and have the interview. The thing is, though, is sometimes some people might want to do the interview first and then see if they're still interested, and then you can go to the rental. It depends on how far away you are from the rental, obviously, because sometimes it's just not convenient, and maybe the interview just ends there and they don't want to see the place, so you don't have to go all the way over to the rental. So that's just something to consider. A copy of this presentation, it's going to be available tomorrow. So keep an eye out for an email. If you don't receive it, because some people said that it's been going to spam or junk, just let me know because I can send it over to you. It's also, we also put all of our recorded webinars on our website under the education tab. And it's called on-demand webinars. So you can see literally every single recording we've ever had, and you can download those and watch them. Next question from Larissa. Should I let tenants know that there is a COVID-infected tenant in the building if I'm asked? So here's the thing. Yes, you can let them know, but you're not allowed to disclose who they are and where they are in the building. That is against their privacy rights. And so and this is something that we covered in the coronavirus webinar, which I'll also send to you guys in the follow-up email resource link. So I'll have a full list of everything that I've referenced today, so you don't have to worry about that. That really was addressed really well on that webinar, and the answer is you cannot disclose that who it is specifically. And then also, if they, this is similar to the other one. If they notified you in April, but they didn't notify you in May that they couldn't pay, should you call on them or wait for their notification? So if you call them and they refuse to discuss with you, what is the result? So I think really it's in their best interest to let you know. It kind of depends on how they gave you the notice in April. Did they sign some sort of agreement with you that's more structured? Because you may actually want to approach them with the rent deferral agreement that we have, that actually could be better for them to just sign off on, and then just have that in place so you don't have to keep coming back to them, or they don't have to keep coming back to you every single month. So I think maybe now would be a good time to approach them and give them that kind of agreement. And then what's the result if they refuse to discuss with you? Well, it kind of depends on the state. So like if you're in a state where you're not allowed to, evict somebody during this time, well, it might not make a difference. So I think maybe that's more of a legal question. I could look into it a little bit more for you. Can you use the Corona letter for existing tenants whose lease is not maturing? Yes, you absolutely can. I highly recommend it for existing tenants as well. Really lays out, your policies, your cleaning, your, advice for them being safe. I think it's great to have for really everybody. And let's see, I have a vacant unit. A couple came in and they're interested. One tenant has a 580 credit score. The other is mid 700s. Should I consider them during these tough times? And what if I can't speak to a landlord for the referral? So can't really do much if you can't speak to the landlord for referral, other than as I suggested, maybe checking some homeowner records to see if you can verify the address and who owns the property at that address. You may be able to do that in some circumstances. And then as for having a mixed couple like that, where 580 and then mid 700s, that's a perfect situation, honestly, for something like Lease Guarantee, because the person who's in the mid 700s, they're definitely going to qualify. And they're going to have a really good rate, probably like the rates that I showed you. And so you could say, hey, you know, I know you guys really want the place, but since you both don't have good credit, as a condition of moving in, we do need you to get Lease Guarantee. And maybe you can you can have them pay for it. And basically that would allow them to get into the unit. So what some landlords do is they might say, okay, let's say your security deposit, you always charge, I don't know, $2,000, okay? So you may want to say, okay, maybe instead of paying $2,000 for the security deposit, you can pay $1,700 and then $300 for a lease guarantee, which is technically non-refundable, but that way it keeps the security deposit the same amount for them, but you're getting actually, you know, $5,000 worth of protection if you have to take them to court. So it's really allowing you to get much more protection without them having to put that much more money out of their pocket. Not to mention you have limits of security deposits in a lot of states. All right, so if I have a vacancy now and they left it clean, is it safer for me to have a maid service at my expense to document cleaning and protect me from a future lawsuit? You know, that could definitely be helpful, but again, you can document your own cleaning as well. So being able to show, you know, what you used to clean the rental is a one way of documenting it. Having a professional is definitely going to be the most legitimate proof. So that may be something you want to start considering on a regular basis. I would maybe, and it's hard to say too, like how clean the tenant left it. So having a maid service might take you out of the loop on that. And then what would be a logical agreement for rent payback? If a tenant cannot pay now, should they pay 50% of back rent each month until they're caught up or what? So that's up to you. So you can have it all due at once, or you can have something like a balloon kind of payment, or you can have the same monthly payment. So it really just depends on their situation and what you believe they'll be able to do. Most of the time, landlords understand that tenants are not suddenly going to be able to pay you thousands and thousands of dollars if they've, you know, been out of work. Just because the agreement ends doesn't mean they suddenly have the money. So you want to be flexible with that and just realistically think about how much they would be able to pay you back on a monthly basis given their income. I mean, you have a lot of information at your disposal, so you can maybe work something that makes sense that is more likely to be paid. So, you know, that might be a good idea, 50% back. So on the rent deferral agreement, you get to choose how much you want them to pay and over how many months after the emergency orders are lifted or whatever it is. So it's just bottom line is just stay realistic with it. That's going to be the best route to take. And then here's one. Just yesterday, I found out that my tenant has 3 pit bulls. Wow, I don't know how they were hiding 3 pit bulls. Well, she was not allowed to have pets, and we served her a 3-day notice. She didn't remove the dogs. We can't start the eviction. What can we do in the meantime? Fortunately, there's not a lot you can do at this time. I would say that you really just have to stay put, and I would say as well, maybe have her sign some sort of pet amendment. So you may need to make an exception and have them as pets, so that if something happens, let's say the pit bulls, you know, attack somebody or something like that, you at least have it in writing that that person, it was responsible for them and that those are their pets. So that might be something that you can look into, is having some sort of amendment, because evictions during this time are just going to be really difficult. And even on a normal basis, evicting for anything other than non-payment of rent can be difficult. And so I would definitely suggest maybe being a little more flexible with them, because they're, like I said, they're probably going to do it anyway. Same thing goes for guests. They're probably going to do it anyway. So the best thing you can do is really just have them sign something, and that way you're in the loop. And here's another one here. If there is there a charge to digitize our rental application so that it can be filled out online? No, there's no charge. Please just let me know. I'll do it for you. It takes me like just a couple seconds. We're going to make this more automated, but if you guys want an online, completely digital application, I'm talking where they fill everything out, they pay for it, and then you get the report instantly, I can set that up for you. So, and that's at no cost. I'll do it for anyone who asks me. So please just let me know if you want something like that. You can reply to my email tomorrow that I'm going to send out. Okay, so the next one is, what is my liability if a signed lease is in existence and the tenant knew that they would be losing their job prior to taking possession and never disclosed? Oh, well, that is definitely a legal question that I cannot answer at this time, but you seem to have here the tenant knew that they would be losing their job prior to taking possession. Yeah, see, that goes back to what I was talking about with their screening strategies and really having to be careful, because if you had maybe had lease guarantee on them, let's say when you're able to evict them, you could get that judgment against them and get paid out. So that would have been really helpful in that case. I mean, it's going to be tough though. The thing is because of the timing, then it might be held up in court, that they do owe you the money and all of that. So definitely more of a legal question, but it's something that is definitely not going to be uncommon. So you guys have to be very careful and really, 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 look into that company and how that company is doing. If you can find more information about it, you really have to be a detective nowadays. I think for these kinds of things, it's almost like you're playing detective. What do you recommend for prospects who insist on an in-person tour after seeing the virtual tour? They're not comfortable without signing a lease, without seeing it first. If it's your policy, then that's something that you have to consider that you're not going to budge on due to safety reasons. If every single person who's interested is seeing the rental, that's a lot of people. Now, one thing that you could do, or you could consider doing, is having some sort of cleaning maybe in between showings, but any person that's coming into contact with the place, it's one more person that you have to worry about. And so it's definitely your call. I would consult with your attorney to see what would be the best way to do it while reducing your liability. I would imagine some sort of cleaning might help with that, but if you want to stand firm on it, then that's definitely going to be the safest, to just not have anybody in the rental until the actual tenant moves in. All right, Pamela, I'll add you to the newsletter. All right, yeah, and if you can't think of a question now, you can definitely email me at any time. If any of you guys know me, you know that I respond. If you've ever emailed me, I'm one of those people who never leaves an email unanswered. So please feel free to email me. And do you have a good idea of a website builder for free to go digital? Yeah, sure. If you want to build a website, the easiest, there's some really easy websites that you can look up, like templates that you can look up to make them. I have some great resources for that I can include to you. Wix is probably the most popular one, Wix. If you want to create a website, and we've actually done webinars before about how to build the best, property management website, which I think applies for landlords too. So I can refer you to that if you're interested. Where to get more information about lease guarantee? So for those of you still on the call, I think this is worth asking. And are any of you guys interested in having some sort of complimentary consultation about lease guarantee? So if you guys could vote yes, or you won't need it now because you don't have a vacancy, maybe later, I can definitely set you up with that. I totally forgot about this poll question. To be honest, I didn't really want to ask it because we were in a really good flow, but I think now that somebody brought it up, I definitely would love to get you in touch with somebody on our team, see if it's a good fit for you, and you can ask all the questions that you want, and we can really customize something for you. So I think that's really the best way to get the information, but I'll also be sending you some information about it in the resources that I'll be emailing to you. So definitely take a look at that and research all of that information. All right, so I'll leave that open while I keep answering some questions. So is it better to purchase lease guarantee or bring a co-signer in with good credit? So, it depends. So a co-signer, they may have good credit, yes, but they are human and they are just as likely to be affected or maybe not just as likely, but likely to be affected by the recession. And so, you want to make sure that you have an entity that you can trust that is actually going to be able to pay that. You can have both, actually. You can have a co-signer and lease guarantee. In fact, if you have a tenant who doesn't qualify for lease guarantee, but they have a co-signer who qualifies, you can put the co-signer, the tenant, and lease guarantee on the lease. That way you have multiple layers of protection to go through. That would be honestly like a home run in terms of reducing liability. Now you have multiple people that a corporate entity and a person that you could go to if the initial tenant doesn't actually make their payments. So that would be perfect. Should you request payment prior to expiration of lease? I'm not sure what you mean by that, Lori. If you want to clarify that, I can maybe answer that. And then, can lease guarantee only be purchased at the beginning of a lease? Yes. So it does have to be at the beginning of the lease before they move in, or it could be at renewal. So anytime the lease is about to start, that would be when you are able to get lease guarantee. And the way that you can get lease guarantee is by going to our website and just screening a tenant. So all of our packages include, most of them include a lease guarantee analyzer. So that allows you to not only screen the tenant, but then it also tells you if they qualify and how much it costs. So you can go there to screen a tenant and then get the lease guarantee all in one. All right, let's see some more questions. I think oh my gosh, it's 12:06 already. Well, I'm going to keep going for a little longer. If you guys want to stay on, you certainly can. And then maybe I'll check in and see how far we get. You guys have a lot of questions in about 10 minutes. All right, so let's see here. So for income, I previously desired 3 times monthly rent. What is a reasonable amount of income, assuming they have reasonable savings on their bank statement? So that's a great question. It's really going to vary. So it depends on how much your lease is, how much your rent payment is, how much they have in savings. The old adage of having 6 months of savings, still applies. That would be great if you can see something like that. And then I think as well, being able to see maybe, especially if they're like self-employed or something like that, what their W-2s, what their income looked like last year, so that you can see maybe some sort of like pattern there and some consistency of how much income they've been bringing in over time. But yeah, it's really just going to depend on that. All right. You have a judgment. Do I have a reputable collection company that works in all 50 states? Yes, I do. And they're called Rent Recovery Service. Okay, they're on our website actually under our Solutions tab. If you go there on our website, and I can send you the link as well. I know I've said that like a million times today, but I'm going to send you a lot of stuff. And basically that there will connect you over to them. They're fantastic. They're our longest partner. They've been with us since 2010, and we send all of our members there. And they do, I think, 49 states. I forgot which is the state that they don't do, but I believe Texas is included because you said you're from Texas for Sherry. So I'll definitely connect you with them. And for those of you on the call too, if you have any outstanding collections, you definitely can start to act on those. All right. Let's see. Lauren, she says, I thought I heard you say you can't ask for an SSN on an application. You can ask for it, but you can't require it. So if they don't put it in, then you can't deny them for that reason. If they don't have an SSN, you can actually ask for an ITIN, which is an individual taxpayer identification number. So some people, before they are able to get an SSN, they actually do pay taxes. And that's one route to be able to become a legal abiding citizen here, legal immigrant. So you can use a taxpayer ID. In fact, people can actually use a taxpayer ID to apply for credit cards and for loans. And so they can actually build a whole credit report and whole address history They can be taken to court, all by using the taxpayer ID number. So if you're in California and you have somebody who's a little hesitant, or they say they don't have a social, ask them if they have maybe a taxpayer ID number. But if they refuse, that's the end of the story, right? That's the end of the conversation. It's unfortunate because it's really helpful. Obviously, as I mentioned, for the background check, it's going to be really, really helpful. And then also too, later down the road, if you do use a collection agency, having their social is going to make a huge difference to be able to track down where they are, be able to track down their identity as well. If you can get it, great. But if not, and you're in California, it's something you're just going to have to deal with as part of being a California landlord. You know, one of the many California landlord issues. So another one here is, does the lease guarantee last through the entire tenancy, no matter the length? It is just for a year, so it is 12 months, which I think is great, especially now. That's probably going to be about how much time it's going to take to start to see really the development of this whole economic crisis. And you may want to get it again, but you don't have to. So I think after 12 months, a lot of landlords see that tenants do pay on time. But then in other cases, we have seen a lot of renewals recently where people had lease guarantees before coronavirus, and then the lease came to get renewed, and now they want to get it again because they're afraid, even though the tenant paid on time. So it is for 12 months, but again, I think that should be enough time to determine kind of where we're at. And then here, do you still recommend long-term leases, or month-to-month is a better choice? You know, there really isn't a better choice per se, at least that I'm aware of at this time. But if you're looking at like month to month, typically before, what the advantage with that is that you can end the lease in some states really with just a 30 or 60-day notice. There are some states where you can't just end it anymore just for any reason, but that was really the advantage before. Now, if you have a month to month, but they refuse to leave, you can't really evict them in a lot of places. And so if you have a place where you're not handling evictions, which is most of the country, then you know, having a month to month isn't really going to be helpful during this time. Long-term lease is great, actually, if you can get it, because we talked about vacancy rates and how those may affect you. So if you happen to be in an area that you foresee or have already seen has higher vacancy rates, or maybe you have one of those luxury kind of high-end properties, you may want to consider a longer-term lease so that you don't have to deal with vacancies during this time. Because just in general, I think this presentation really highlights how difficult it is to fill a vacancy during a pandemic. And so you may want to avoid that, and that may actually be better than to have a long-term lease. But again, it's up to you which one you go with. I think really finding the right tenant is going to be the most important thing. All right, aside from landlord employment reference, you recommend personal references. If so, what types of questions should we ask? So I can send you over some questions for employers and landlords. Personal references are a little tricky because obviously, you know, they know them. They're going to probably have a really good opinion of them. And so it'd be difficult to really get a really honest opinion. But, you know, can't hurt either. So, you know, if you want to, if somebody offers, or you want to have them do it, you can. I remember when I applied for my first rental, I had just turned 18, and I actually had my professor from my college write me a personal reference because I had no credit. And so and the homeowner, the landlord, they knew you know, is a legitimate professor, and they talked to him, and they, you know, they gave me the place even though I had no credit. I didn't want to use a cosigner. I wanted to be really independent, and they made an exception for me. So, you know, that's one way you could have a personal reference work. And how do you create a virtual tour? You can use really any video platform. You know, right now we're on Zoom, so something similar like this. You know, I could flip my camera and just take you through my house if I wanted to right now. That could help. All right, so if the landlord pays for lease guarantee, is the fee per property, or can you do it for all properties? So it is per property, so per lease agreement, actually. So however many lease agreements you have, that is, each one has a certain fee, and that fee, it depends on, again, the tenant's credit, and then also how much protection you want. So we usually recommend at least 2, maybe 3 months of rent worth of protection. So That's going to depend too on like if you have multiple units with different rent amounts, you may want to get different amounts of lease guarantee. So the fee would probably be different for every single unit, but certainly something you could do if you wanted to insure all of your units. Does lease guarantee cover you if the tenant moves out before the eviction judgment? Yes, it does. In California, if you do not renew a lease, does it just keep going indefinitely if you do not give your tenant a notice of non-renewal? So we're actually going to have a California-specific webinar. Okay, here is my plug for it. It is going to be in June. I know some of you guys might want to answer sooner than that. So, but in June, we're going to be going over AB 1482, which was the California law that was went into effect on January 1st of 2020. It completely changed all of California rentals, or almost all of California rentals, and put them under rent control. One of the things being here, whether or not lease gets renewed or not is really not up to you anymore. So you have to have a just cause in order to terminate a lease, even if the lease is supposed to terminate in 12 months. And so the attorney that we're going to have on, Steve, he's actually going to be discussing if that applies to you, because it doesn't apply to every single landlord, but most of you on the call, it's going to apply to. So he's going to do a whole hour on that, and I really think that's going to be the best if you have questions about you know, California leases, that he's going to be the guy to really talk to. And I can share his information with you too if you want. Okay, regarding showings, what if the property is still tenant occupied? Ooh, that's a tough one, right? So probably don't want to be in contact with the tenants, but you know, really maybe having the tenants waiting, you might have to wait till the tenants leave, might be the safest option. Or if the tenants want to cooperate and maybe help you out with the virtual showing, that would be amazing, but you might not want to. So that is definitely going to be a lot harder during this time. And I think people do understand that. So also making sure that the pictures that you have are really like really well done, or at least if you have current pictures, you know, past pictures that you may be able to fix up, having that may help somebody kind of get a feel for the property as well. Okay, so we have a ton more questions, but I'm gonna just answer one more here. Some states limit deposits to 2 or 3 times the monthly rent. Does lease guarantee count as a deposit if the landlord requires the tenant to pay the policy premium? It's not a security deposit. So it's a security deposit alternative. So it does not count in terms of your maximum. So you can still charge the maximum security deposit and do lease guarantee. It's different than a security deposit. It acts like a security deposit. In fact, it's better than a security deposit because it's worth a lot more if you know, use the policy. But it does not count actually as a security deposit. So you could do both, or you could do it instead of a security deposit. But it shouldn't affect as long as your actual security deposit's within the limit, it shouldn't affect anything. Okay, so that being said, we have 50 more questions. So clearly I'm not going to get to all of those today, but if you will be patient with me, I will be addressing all of them. And please, when you exit today, I would love it if you could take the survey. I want to know, you know, how you rated my webinar. Please be honest with me. I really use your feedback. And then also I put in a few questions from that landlord survey that I mentioned to you. Again, answering those questions really helps us to put the word out there as to how difficult it is for landlords during this time. And I think it's really important for that to be out in the media and in the news, and that can eventually help affect policy changes. And so we'd love for you to take just a couple minutes, it's just 4 questions to answer you know, how coronavirus is affecting your rentals during this time. And for those of you on the call who want more webinars, we have a whole bunch of them coming up. So I highly encourage you to go to our education tab on our website at aaoa.com and take a look at everything that's coming up. And then also you can go back and look at some of the recordings. Some of them are free for you to view, and others you may have to become a member for. But once you become a member, you will have access to those recordings. So I would say take a look at that if you're interested in learning more. I'm very happy that we had so many of you on the call today. Thank you for joining, and I'll be in touch with you tomorrow via email with everything that we talked about. And for the questions, again, give me a little bit of time, but hopefully soon we'll be in touch. For those of you still on the call, have a wonderful day and take care.